Hi, I'm IKEA, and for today's video I want to give a build showcase on a high-end red. And for today's showcase we'll be sticking to one build and one variation of a high-end red, as there are many ways of making high-end reds, and most of them are also valid as they are more tiered towards having either specific talents or being more geared towards specific content. The one we're going to be discussing today is going to be a Providence-based for perfect glass, and that is very much the old top dog of damage, and it was always a little bit behind the Negotiator, but nowadays it is also quite behind Strikers in pure damage output, but it is very much a generalist build as it is very mechanic light. Now, as always, I will be making extensive use of my build collection and several build pictures from there. And even for this build of today, in the recommended build file, as it is there, this build is actually at the very tippy top of it, although in a different variation than the build picture is there. And we'll discuss that when we get there. And as always, this showcase will be split up into two chapters. In the first chapter, I'll go over the build, the layout choices, how to lay it out, what weapon choices, specialization choices, what skills kind of work with it. Then we'll go into some of the numbers. We won't go that in-depth into it as we could go very deep, but just to make it a bit more manageable in time, I'm going to keep that part a little bit short. Then we'll go into a separate into a second chapter where we will take this build into some gameplay, and I will try to live narrate and give you insights into what I'm doing while I'm doing it, and try to give you the tools to run this build either better than you are, hopefully, or just to give you, if you are completely new to it, to give you some insights into it. And all of those will be timestamped below, so you can jump around as needed. If we jump to the build as I have it in-game, and here's of course the build we're going to discuss today. A high-end red with glass, so made up of high-end pieces, which means that when we usually say high-end build, that's to differentiate it from gear set based builds. So in a high-end build, we're using just normal pieces, named pieces, exotics, stuff like that. Now, this build is very much built around glass. It doesn't need to be. The build layout style can be very easily swapped to different talents, as even here, for instance, this is actually the build, and also on the build picture, if I bring that up, as it is here, you can see that it's actually saved with not the way that I have it shown in game, where there is a coyote's mask there and a perfect glass cannon chest. And this is the layout of the high end that I would recommend if you want to have the option to go perfect glass red. And that's usually when you go Providence. You can actually avoid having Providence in your build, and avoid having that, especially the first piece of Providence is of course that brand bonus of 15 headshot damage, which isn't a good bonus for this build. You don't really make use of going for headshots. So dropping that and going Seska, Grupo, and the Fenris piece together with contractors and coyotes and foxes and then a coyote's mask. That is actually a better layout if you never want to go glass. What the Providence layouts provide is the option to go glass if you want to do so. And the reason you would want to do so is that glass is actually a much higher damage potential than most of the other talents there, without needing much input of you. So focus, of course, does outdo it by quite a lot, but focus also requires you to, of course, be scoped in and build up the buff and then try to maintain it and such. Where glass, you do have to keep in mind that, yeah, you are a glass cannon, but except for that, you don't have any really prerequisites, and it's also from the very first shot. As yeah, glass, as always, is active from the first shot. But as well, if we jump back into game, So yeah, I have it saved with that Providence Obliterate chest, and actually from the build next door, I grab the glass chest when I need to, and in this case, I do want to need to. And the coyote as well is the piece that goes in, as even with this build where it is 59 crit chance, and I will show in the calculations in a second, it is actually still a viable and good choice here. Now, build layout wise, it is quite dependent on what you need from the build, as there are many ways, as I said, to put high-end reds together. What you usually want to do is a combination of pieces of Providence, as all of those brand bonuses work well, a piece of Grupo, a piece of Fenris, and then you have the options, you have the option of putting a Coyote in if you need to, and Fox's Prayer is pretty much mandatory. So the Fox's Prayer, especially is because of that damage to targets out of cover bonus, nothing competes with it in this slot, as long as build-wise, if you can reach the crit chance cap in a reasonable way, nothing can compete with the Fox's Prayer, where, for instance, in a Striker's build, you don't have that option. You would have to give up basically crit chance in other places for this to be put in there. And that's usually where this idiom comes from, is that, yes, on high-end reds, Fox's Prayer is basically unbeatable, where very much on gear set Strikers, for instance, it isn't actually the good choice. And it's very much a combination of those brands that I said. So up to 3 pieces of Providence, up to a piece of Fenris, up to a piece of Grupo, a Coyote, and that means that you have a lot of ways where you can alter this layout. Now, of course, as well, so I do have a Providence mask that could be that third slot instead of the Coyote. The Grupo and the Fenris, for instance, could swap places. The things, of course, that are kind of locked in is that Fox's Prayer, that is, of course, only that Neatbot slot. The Sacrifice, as that is only a chest slot, of course. That is the named Providence, and it's only for the chest. And you always want to go perfect glass cannon over normal glass cannon. Backpack-wise as well, you can lock yourself in if you're going, like I am here with the Gift, the named Providence backpack, which is a DZ PvP item. So there for perfect vigilance. Although this isn't really required, normal vigilance, the only difference between the two is that the disabling of the buff goes from 4 seconds on normal to 3 seconds on perfect, and that isn't a difference that is really going to make a difference. As such, you shouldn't really go out of your way to get the Gift, but if you have one, put it in. If you don't go out of your way until you basically have every other piece already, as it is a shiny, but don't do the reasonable stuff first and then chase the shinies later. Now, if we quickly look at the build picture for this build again, I'll bring that up. So what you see here is that I've gone for crit damage rolls on all of the pieces. Every place that can have a crit damage roll has a crit damage roll. All the mod slots, of course, the second piece alongside the Fox Prayer. And the only place where I don't is in this holster, where I'm taking one weapon handling roll alongside of the crit damage. So all of the other places have crit chance as well, except, of course, the Fox's Prayer, where it wouldn't make sense. And here I'm giving up one of the crit chance roll here for weapon handling, and that's we are landing on 59 this way. And that's, of course, what you have usually with the layout like this without contractors is you have to swap a crit chance somewhere to something else to not go way over the cap. So normally one of the options is to go contractors, which actually in the second build that I will showcase during this gameplay, I will actually swap to a contractors. But the thing with contractors is the way that armor is that even on purple enemies, half of their total pool is armor, half of it is health, or about, depending on enemy type and such, of course. And even on elites, it's around 80% armor, 20% health. So you never reach the potentials that, for instance, damage to targets out of cover has, where we usually consider that around 90% active on most content. Except, of course, if you're fighting stuff like, for instance, the raid bosses and such, and their contractors makes a lot more sense. And that's also why we'll show both variants. Now, here's also, I have a 1 weapon handling roll. I'm keeping crit chance on the weapon, all 3 of those rolls, and that works out quite handy. If we jump back to the game, just to briefly touch on weapons, as we could go very in-depth also on the build itself, but I want to keep this a little bit brief, is that we are going for a AR here as the primary weapon, as ARs are just the best generalist tools. They are plenty of damage at good enough ranges, and they're automatic, of course, as well, so you don't have to keep clicking. And their bonus is also very good with that. Well, the health damage isn't the best stat. 21% of it is quite high, and that makes it compete with all of the other, and out-compete actually most of the other weapon types you could go for here. And when we're going ARs, my preferred one is very much the FAMAS, as long as I don't need flatline, as that's the only downside of the FAMAS. You don't get to have flatline effectively, as you do not have access to a long underbarrel rail, which the pulse laser of Technician requires. And actually, for that second piece of gameplay where I put in the contractors, it will also swap to flatline weapons, as flatline as the talent is actually the strongest choice. It is quite a high increase at 15% to both burst and sustain. The other options are fast hands, but fast hands only adds to your sustain. It adds nothing to your burst. The other, if you're going for a damage talent for a FAMAS, for instance, in this case, where it can't go flatline, the better choice is always flatline, but then you have to drop to other weapons. If you want to stay FAMAS, strained is the other option for this build, as this build, especially for running Optimist or something, it has too much, it has too many red cores. Optimist does not compete with strained until you are basically almost all blue cores. The secondary, we're going with a rifle here, of course, as that together with that works well with the Fox's Prayer, as we have a bonus for them, and you basically just want to have a secondary that is a different ammo type, just so when you run out of ammo you can swap. Now a rifle works well as well, as it increases our effective range. If we swap to it, we can reach out and touch someone at way longer distances than a FAMAS can effectively and also optimally, because its optimal range is so much higher. When you have contractors, you can also choose to go a secondary LMG. And other options, of course, are also to put in a Scorpio, as that works very well as well. I always use a TDI card custom, especially with red builds, as with that skill tier, we can use that together with the Hive to swap to the pistol, toss out our Hive. It will then be 2 charges instead of 1 with that extra skill tier. And in that way, you can revive others while keeping a charge for yourself. So you can then go, after revive someone else, you can go and pick it up as it has 1 charge left at that point. Specialization-wise, as with all of these red builds, it's very much agnostic to what is in that slot. Now, I'm going to grab Demolitionist for this first piece of gameplay and Technician for the second one, and that's very much because I want to showcase Demolitionist as well and what it can do somewhat. But the generalist choice, and if you just want a choice to pick for if you're starting out, is Gunner, as Gunner has perks and talents that apply really well to especially this build, especially with the FAMAS, as it has armor on kill, it has that on kill rate of fire increase, that when you're standing still you get weapon handling bonuses, the extra ammo and such. All of that applies really well to that build. But all of the other specializations also have things that really work well. The only one that doesn't synergize well with, especially the glass cannon variant that I'm going to run today, is Firewall with the flamethrower, where this is mostly based on short range perks and talents, and that very much is not in line with a glass red. The glass red wants to keep a little bit more distance, wants to keep a little bit more awareness up. So Demolitionist, sharpshooter, gunner, sharpshooter, survivalist, and technician are your choices. Firewall, not so much. But try them all out. Gunner, as if you just want a generalist one, and all the other ones have benefits that also can benefit you quite well. On skills, one slot is usually going to be taken up by a Reviver Hive. All red builds like having the Reviver Hive, as it will pick you up if you go down. You can use it, of course, also to pick up other people. And it's too valuable a tool to give up easily. Usually only cool skills makes me swap out my Revive Hive on red builds, and especially also on glass red, where we have a tendency to go down more than most other red builds. Then, yeah, Reviver Hive is my primary choice very much. Now, for the other skill slot, as with all red builds again, is you are open to pick whatever you enjoy having here, and also be sure to try all of the things out and see which ones you like. So for me personally, to give some recommendations, Pulse works really well. Banshee Pulse works really well if you're going Gunner. Decoy works really well. EMP Sticky, especially against Black Tusk and their Hounds and mini tanks and such. Foam Cam works really well as just a CC that you can just deploy when you need it. And Blinder Firefly and Demolisher Firefly work really well as openers for starting combat. Now, in this layout with glass, I would not recommend using any of the shields, as all of the shields also get affected by glass, and they take 60% more damage, making them very brittle, as especially here we do not have any cores or anything applying to them as well. So, and when they break, you get that disorient effect nowadays, and that makes them, yeah, not the choice to go with, especially with glass. With Obliterate, and especially with Focus, of course, they work really well, but in this case, not so much. But yeah, just play around, see what you like grabbing. I very much always like having a Scanner Pulse. Banshee is really good as well. Having discussed all this, let's briefly jump into some of the numbers. And here we have the calculation sheet as I have it prepared for today. And I have a video nowadays explaining how these work quite in depth, and how you could use them yourself as well as a video on my channel. But just to give a brief introduction, if you don't want to go look through all that, these are calculators, multi-calculators that can be used to compare builds quite easily. And what you especially need to know is that the 10 rows downstairs are the stats for the 10 rows upstairs. Input happens downstairs, output comes upstairs. And all of these numbers, the percentages, are comparing to the build in the top slot here. And as always, I've put a Glass Vigilance Red, an Obliterate Vigilance Red, and an Unbreakable Vigilance Red as stats at the top, as that's what I always use to compare against, as I know them quite well. But that might actually then surprise you, as what is the difference between that Glass Vigilance Red and this one then? And that is actually, if I bring up its the build picture, this is the build that I usually use as my calculation, as my test bed for my calculations. And the big difference is, of course, that weapon handling rule that I had in that build has been removed. And instead of that, the FAMAS has one crit damage mod. And while I said that that isn't my recommended way, or my preferred way even, just for the sake of argument is usually why I use those stats, as people will quite often point to that weapon handling stat and go, oh, but there are better ways of outputting damage. And technically this is higher in damage output, but I would gladly give up that crit damage mod for that weapon handling role, as I obviously do. And looking at the numbers for it as well, if we jump back and if I line this up better, what we see here is that if we compare that Glass Vigilance Red as it is there with that crit damage mod and no weapon handling rolls on the build, just not having that weapon handling roll on the holster, we are losing about 2.27% of damage output on burst. And that is, of course, anything over a percent and a half is going to be a little bit noticeable. It is going to, if you're used to a build and you lose or gain about a percentage, that's about the point where you will start to notice that. So it is noticeable. It is a loss, but it isn't a loss just for no reason. We do get the weapon handling. And if we then look at the sustain, actually, we can see that, of course, because the weapon handling is going to affect our reload, the sustain is actually better on the build with the weapon handling. But that is, well, I could make that point. That isn't really true for the build as I'm running it with fast hands, because fast hands is completely going to negate this increase that we have here against the other build. But if was running strained or something, then yeah, the sustain would be a little bit higher, but you would still, this loss in burst would be noticeable. Now, what I've put here as well, just as a comparison point, is that same build with having that one weapon handling rule and having crit chances on all the weapon mod slots, but then as obliterate. And we can see that, yeah, or we could compare it at the top here as well. Going from obliterate, so this is obliterate at full stacks. Going from that to glass is, yeah, quite an increase. It's 7.5% or more. And of course, obliterate doesn't start there. Obliterate has to stack up to those 25 stacks, where glass starts there, and both of them can lose vigilance and drop a little bit more damage. But yeah, reaching that and keeping that obliterate stacks is not a true number for the build, basically, where with the glass it is closer to being true, basically. And that is the strength of glass. Glass is quite an increase over most of the other talents in that slot, with the sole exception of focus. But then focus locks you very much into, yeah, the having to play quite differently, this complete different playstyle. Now, actually, what I should say here is that this glass vigilance red, as I have it there, is actually the numbers if I was running the Providence mask. So if I actually jump into the game, so if I was running it with this Providence mask, that is what that top set of stats was. Now, the difference to going from that to Coyote is these, if I bring it back up, the green numbers that I have down here, and this is with the 3 different Coyote ranges, of course. Now, if what I really want to compare, of course, is this build versus the green build, basically, versus the blue build, the difference of that Coyote. And I've mapped those out here with their burst differences out here, as that's what we really care about, of course. And what we can see is that with the Coyote, of course, in short range, we basically gain a 10 crit damage in effect over the brand bonus of having a third piece of Providence there. And so, yeah, our damage goes up by 2.8%. But we do not really lose much in that 15 to 25 meters, where we're only getting 10 crit damage and 10 crit chance from the Coyote, of course. There, because we even have that little hole of 1% in the crit chance, the loss is negligible. And that's why I usually do run this with Coyote, because even though I am, of course, this is the 15 to 25 meters is the range that I mostly want to engage in. And here I am losing here, of course, a little bit. What I am doing is providing a group buff. And unless there's already 2 or 3, usually 3 Coyotes already in the group, I will keep my Coyote and keep the Coyote buff up for others. As yeah, you can have multiple Coyotes active as long as you cannot have multiple of the same buff, but you can have different buffs active at the same time. So somebody could be providing the short range buff if they're playing short range a lot more, and then I could then provide the mid range buff. And quite often you will find that even though as popular as the Coyote should be, as I would, if we were doing tierings of tier list of exotics, the Coyote would very much be an S tier exotic. Still, a lot of people don't run it. Now, of course, we lose that a little bit at longer ranges than 25 meters, where we're only getting that crit chance buff, but we don't have a hole in the build basically for that to fill up. There we're losing, of course, but still we're not losing. We're not dropping down to even obliterate levels or something. And also, this is beyond the effective range of the FAMAS. Well, the FAMAS has an optimal range of 28 meters. So I'm mostly going to try to stick to 15 to 25 meters. So I'm mostly concerned with those two numbers. If I'm fighting at longer than 25 meters, something has gone wrong already, basically. And here at the end, I've put the striker obli just as a comparison point. So this is a striker with an obliterate Seska chest and a coyote mask. So with the striker's backpack stacked to 100 at full stacks and obliterate stacks. And we can see that this trounces everything on this list, of course. But that doesn't tell the whole story. And while I have said, and I do still agree with that usually when I'm running a glass red, in the back of my mind, I go like, I wouldn't mind running a striker instead of this class. While that is true for me personally, a person that really likes playing with mechanics, playing differently and such, it is completely understandable if people don't want to engage with that. And the thing that the high-ends have, the high-end reds in general, all of them, is that they're a lot lighter on mechanics than Negotiator, than Strikers, than Heartbreakers. You don't have to do the stacking of Strikers and Heartbreakers. You don't have to do the marking of Negotiator. So it's a lot easier to use. And that's also why these are also still the recommended builds for running in raids, as, well, they aren't super mechanically heavy compared to some other games, especially for the first few runs. It is better to have a build like a high end where you can focus on the content and not so much on your build, than having to deal with both, basically not having to deal with stacking and such makes it a lot easier to focus on the task at hand. Now, moving on, what we have here is the age-old question, if we were to calculate it out. I have that Fenris glove, of course, which I have, if I bring up the game again, what if instead of that Fenris glove, we went a Grupo glove, and then, of course, this Grupo would become a Providence then. But basically the question of, is it better to go Grupo, or crit damage brand bonus, or is it better to go a weapon damage brand bonus? And the reason why there is, like, you will get a wishy-washy answer always to it is it depends. And here we see actually that on this specific build, they are exactly the same. The difference between them is 300 DPS on 7.6 million. So it is even up to 2 decimal points, we are not getting a difference between the two. And that is the reason. These two are very much, the game makers were quite decent, actually, especially with the talents as they came in with the warlords, and all of the stuff is pretty well calculated to fit together well. Although, of course, some have been changed over the years to be better than they are now. But yeah, especially as you can see, the difference between those two is non-existence. But there is a big but, well, a small but. And that is that the Fenris, of course, only applies to when we are using the FAMAS. When I'm using a secondary, and if I were to use a secondary a lot, then the Grupo applies to both, and that would make it a better choice. And that's usually why we say that you don't really need the weapon damage bonus on a high-end build. You don't need a Fenris piece in there. You can go 3-piece Providence and a piece of Grupo together with Contractors and Coyotes, and then swap one of the Providence pieces or the Grupo piece over to Coyote when you need a Coyote. And that's the reason for this. Now here is a second set with these purple ones where I add in basically 20 weapon damage, simulating a grade, having put in a grade 20 FAMAS. And there, of course, we're changing the balance as we're diminishing the returns that weapon damage would give per point when we're adding in that bonus to it. And we see that that happens is that once we start to put expertise grades on our weapon, then we have to leaning towards Grupo even more and more. But of course, this is still a tiny change. This is a third of a percent. This is a third of a percent, 0.35%, and that's not going to be noticeable difference. So either way is basically fine, and that's why we usually don't really have a good answer for you there. Also, briefly here underneath, I've put the number. So what is the difference between those two? So going from the Fenris, both of them, the Fenris one, but then going from 0 grades on the weapon to grade 20, and that's 8.33%. That's the amount that grade 20 increases your output by, and that is very much noticeable. That is basically the difference from another obliterate at full stacks on top. So grading your weapons, very much worthwhile. It is costly. It is, of course, save it for your best weapons, but it is a noticeable increase. Now, finally, this one is going to need a little bit, the screen one is going to need a little bit of an explanation. So this is if we were to have 2 of these builds, the exact same one, the Fenris one, as I showed it, basically. And one of them is Demolitionist and is providing a 5% damage to targets out of cover to the second one. So, of course, that group damage to targets out of cover bonus is only for your allies. It doesn't apply to yourself. That's with most of the group buffs that the specializations can provide. So basically, what do we gain by gaining 5 damage to targets out of cover? And we can see that is 4.2%, and that makes this quite a valuable damage increase. Demolitionist's buff to its allies is actually quite strong. So where usually Survivalist gets brought up, and especially Firewall gets brought up by Survivalist, of course, applying 10% to status-affected enemies, which in concert with being an Eclipse can be a really good damage bonus to your team. But usually also Firewall gets brought up as if there's someone that runs that and has proximity on enemies, that can be also a really good buff. But Demolitionist doesn't get brought up as often as it should, I feel. So I wanted to highlight that here a little bit. So that group buff to allies is quite strong. It's a lot more than it's almost half of the increase that we would get from going from grade 0 to grade 20. So around another 10 grades worth of output on your allies. Now we have discussed this build quite in depth, I feel, and we, of course, could go on for hours and hours, and I likely might with a glass red, well, actually a high-end red masterclass at some point. But for now, let's keep it at this, and let's jump into some gameplay. Here I've accepted an invite for Camp Wido, which is invaded this week. I'm not sure if this character has done it yet, so... although I believe it has, so it might be the normal one, which it seems... Yeah, it is. As always, when I load in, I will kind of look at my allies, what they have as skills, what their armor bars kind of look like, what their shade level is as well, for instance, in this case, especially as there's 2 quite low levels. And that will help me kind of know what my allies are. And while I'm not super dependent on them, as I'm a red build, I'm not supporting them or anything. What does matter is if there is some support for me. As for instance, an Eclipse can make quite the difference to how easy it is to run a mission. Same for instance, if there's a healer in the group, that can also help a little bit. Now, here I'm going to go after that loot, let my allies get ahead of me. I don't mind catching up in this part. They can't mess it up too bad, even though they are basically rushing in and just auto-engaging, it seems, which is going to end bad for them, especially on this mission. Now, one of the things as well with red builds is, when they get supported, it works out a lot better than unsupported. In most games, of course, you have the trifecta of tank, healer, and damage dealer. In Division, mostly it's reds and supports, and tanks really don't figure into this. And you can see basically supports as either just mitigating damage or healing the damage, because a FI healer can also work quite well with a few reds. But the tanks are basically completely omitted in Division. There is no good aggro or threat mechanics really, and that means that aggro will just bleed towards the highest damage output players. And here as well, I am glass. There is that does affect my playstyle quite a bit. Glass reds are glass cannons, and that means that I don't want to go down that often. Now, I am not averse to going down here and there if otherwise I would be playing way too cautiously. Basically, if you basically never go down, if that is the playstyle you're going for, you're likely also not putting yourself into situations where you can deal good damage. That's always the trade-off there, that you play aggressive, and yeah, that may at times cost you a charge on your hive, but never going aggressive and just hanging out in the back and trying to being outside of your optimal and stuff like that, playing it too safe can actually usually make things have things take way longer than they need to take. I'm good at ammo, so I'm not going to grab ammo there. I will grab all the loot, as especially there's a level 6 that could likely use anything good that I get, although I will only grab good stuff. And here there's a path that we could take as well to go after some extra loot. I will only go if this ally in front of me goes. Now, yeah, so as a glass, I do play it a little bit differently than I would even with the obliterate red or such, because chip damage is a lot more dangerous to this build than it is even being an obliterate in comparison. Just getting hit by rushers, by stuff like mini dogs, mini tank, mini gun dogs, or mini tanks can be, you can take quite a few hits of those on quite a lot of other builds. You can't when you're glass. Those things are quite dangerous, and especially, for instance, drones, especially in Summit and such, can be a lot more dangerous for glass reds than they are for normal reds. And you just have to be aware of that, play around with it, and that is the play style that you kind of have to learn to play as when you play glass reds. Glass reds are quite different than most of the other damage dealing builds, and in the past especially, that was a downside that used to come with the great upside of them being the highest damage potential builds that were available at those times. Now, of course, that's kind of been that's no longer the case, especially with strikers and such, and that kind of makes it a less viable choice. They're not less viable builds, but as a choice they are less viable a little bit. They have the same effectiveness that they always had, and that means that, yeah, we used to do all of the content with without strikers and such, so everything is doable without them. But with them, it's a little bit easier, and that's a little bit of the downside. But I would still recommend trying out glass reds, having one, especially in your build collection, because especially not so much the glass red, but dropping it down to an obliterate red, just swapping the chest to another Providence chest, and using that either with obliterate or unbreakable for especially raids. If you are interested in raids, there's still the recommendation is to go with the first time to go with an high-end red, but then with obliterate or unbreakable. We have rogues here. I'm going to in a second swap my skill to foam. Normally, if I had if I was just running, if I wasn't recording specifically to showcase a glass red, I would swap here to a PvE build. That would be very much my choice. There's a chest up there which I'm just not gonna go for. I'm gonna stick with my group. I'm hoping my ally here pulses, as I do want to have that pulse. I want to also be behind everyone else. Let them take a little bit more of the damage. The pulse was out of range of them. They come all the way from the cabin, so they might take some time to get to here. Although by now I would have expected them to be here. The fog is likely, so mechanically fog and heavy rain and sandstorms and such, they decrease the visibility range also for NPCs and also for your turret and drone. You may have noticed that, especially in the rain, your drones work a lot less. Here, the second we engage here, we're going to... so I'm going to see if I can find a target. So also the red is actually disabled, that your crosshair goes red when it's at those distances with together with with fog, as we have here. I'm going to see if one of my allies goes after one specific enemy, if we have any good enemies in front of us. And what we really would want to have happen here is that we focus a few down. The second their numbers go down by quite a lot, then this becomes a much easier fight. I thought it was short. Actually, I wasn't. I was just in range. He stopped a little bit earlier than I thought. I'm going to go around this side. Uh-oh, that's not great for me, as that enemy was protected. I'm going to try and foam them. I'm hoping my allies, I see them on the minimap moving towards me. I'm hoping they will just assist with this. If we can burn down 2 of them, that's already going to put us in a much better position. Now, I'm going to foam again. I am going to kill that artillery turret. At least try to. And the danger here especially is, yeah, that I will... I got taken down by the direct impact of that. That's actually quite funny. I have never... I don't remember a time that that has happened to me. I have shock rounds in my secondary weapon. I'm going to use them here a little bit as a CCing tool. And I'm going to see if I can, with my allies here, quickly kill off one of these enemies. Now, that one is going to die there. I'm going to toss a grenade, hoping to, yeah, push them out. I'm going to go for a foam. I'll go for the direct impact, as I could not hit the ground in front of them. That takes out another one. And there's only one left, I believe. I will actually grab the loot real quick, just in case. I have crashed quite often, just before even this fight ends. So you always loot before running along as well. I'm going to use foam here and make this a safe ending. There we go. And yeah, that we, especially because we were expecting them to rush into us, so at the start of it, we dilly-daddled a little bit, but that wasn't too bad of an outcome. We dealt with a rogue team, and we did not have any support units. Especially Eclipse can make that fight a lot easier, or even having healing can make it a lot easier. Quite often also players will swap to turret and drones. Just doing that fight with all turret and drone players builds can actually be quite easy, because you just send your turret and your drones after them, and it is mostly a fight for survival in for most teams. And as long as you basically survive, you will outdo them. I'm actually going to quickly reinspect my allies. One of the things that is important. So here there's, I saw now that there was 2 coyote buffs active, and that always leads me to check to see how many coyotes are active. And again, 1 or 2 is quite fine. As you see there, we have both buffs active. We have 2 of the buffs active, and that works quite well. Here actually is one of the places where a grenade launcher is going to make quite a difference, as I will show in a second. So they're all packed together, and they are very much going to be very much easily dealt with. And that wave can actually give quite a lot of issues for a lot of teams. It's a fully elite wave, and that wave is usually one of the ones you have to kind of deal with. Now, a grenade launcher, when they're all packed together like that, it is a great AoE tool. And too few players actually make effective use of them. Especially the grenade launcher, I would say, is very much a weapon that is worth using. For some of the other specialization weapons, they might be too situational to use. I can quite understand that, but especially the grenade launcher is, yeah, it's very much usable. And I will likely use it again at the boss fight. As there again, it will be a lot of packed enemies. And whenever you have that, the damage potential of that grenade launcher is actually going to be quite a lot higher than I would even have available to me with any other weapon. Also here actually is interesting, we have 2 strikers and we have 2 high ends, although likely that guy has just crashed. That's what it looked like. We have loot on the right side here. I will kind of look at my allies, see what they're doing. If they go for the loot, I'll go for the loot, and they're not going for the loot. They're going for the fight. And then I will leave the loot. That position is very much, at least on the pier, is very much exposed, and that makes it not a choice I'm willing to make. I will not go after the loot there while we are also in a fight. I would wish that my ally pulsed a little bit more often, but I'll likely swap back in a second to pulse itself. I will grab these 2 loots. I will also actually grab these flame rounds just in my FAMAS. And I will start pushing back out with my allies. I'm just reconning by fire there, trying to see if I can get hits on enemies. But quite often, yeah, especially here, there are trees that I cannot see. There are a lot of stuff in the way quite often. And actually, the fog is helping us quite a lot here, as it's making this fight a lot easier. And that's quite often the case. Fighting, especially enemies during sandstorm, during fog, during heavy rain, is actually usually quite easier, especially if you're not a close range build. If you can be mid-rangey, like this build very much enjoys being a little bit, at least even now, we're even actually at the long range buff of the coyote, and that means that when the enemies actually have difficulty seeing us, they have difficulty spotting us. New wave that spawns don't rush down towards you. I'm going to go after and help my allies. I see that we are surrounded. Here I will actually use that pistol. So here I'm using the pistol. I have 2 charges. I dropped my hive down while it had 2 charges. It's going to revive him, even though we out of combat revived him actually there. And that is that simple trick of using your TDI card custom to get a second charge. So there I could have gone and picked up my hive after it revived him, which wouldn't be the case if I only had 1 charge. If normally, of course, I have 1 charge on it. But what it then does do is it doesn't need to recharge that charge back, but that's inconsequential. It's fine because I still have a charge for myself for if I go down. Curious as to why they aren't moving up with us, but they'll get pulled in a second anyway. Here again, I'm going to use the grenade launcher again. And yeah, the grenade launcher is a great tool for when there is packed enemies. I would love for him to pulse here, but likely not going to happen. But yeah, you saw some damage numbers on that right side there. I could not do that same thing with my main weapon. Where, for instance, with the minigun, that's usually why I don't use the minigun, is I can do the same output as the minigun usually with my main weapon in most cases. Where, yeah, there with the grenade launcher, I was weakening the enemies quite a lot before we started to deal with them. I will also be curious at the end of this to see what the damage numbers are. I'm not playing that well. I will easily admit that. But as I'm, of course, talking and not paying that great attention, and also I haven't warmed up, really, I will go and try to assist my ally there, although I'm trying to the boss. They're very much on top of the boss. I can't use a trick again because my hive is on 1 cooldown. I will res him first and then go down from there. But my hive will get me up. I was actually expecting to go into health gate, but apparently the bosses that pulse does not. Or I had already used my death gate. There I was actually hoping for him to jump back out again. I had not noticed that he had actually gone into cover. His animation was a little bit weirder than I expected. But we got through here with 4 red builds. And this is actually also one of the things that, yeah, still works quite fine. 4 red builds can go through a lot of content, especially with now with strikers as well, increasing the output. And that was for a long time the idea. You kill things faster than they kill you. I'll look at the damage a little bit. I am actually surprised that I'm the highest output, but that's likely also down a little bit to my allies being of lower levels and such. And yeah, that you have to learn again a little bit, and I have that for myself, but yeah, they still have a lot of growing to do, especially the 2 very low players ones. I will share those 2 that item and see if I have anything else worthwhile sharing, as if there is a top stat in there, then that can be quite useful, especially if you're just level 6. And I would recommend also to always do this when you're with newer players. Just I don't need a little bit more resources, but they could likely use a little bit more in their inventory. Now, in a second, we'll hop in over to that flatline, and I'll introduce that one in a second. And here is that other build. What has mostly changed is, while we are on a different character, the layout-wise, it basically is the same, but the parts that have changed is we've brought in a contractor's gloves. We have swapped to flatline talented weapons, and that also means that we're logging ourselves basically into technician as well. And both of those together puts us at 54 crit chance, but to even get to 54 crit chance, we have to give up that weapon handling role that we had before. So now every place that can have crit chance next to crit damage, I've put crit chance. So all of the pieces have crit damages, have crit damage mods where they have possible, and the contractors and the foxes are of course with crit damage next to that special stat. In this case as well, the contractors is allowing us to use an LMG as well as a viable choice, and I am grabbing an LMG in this case as well with flatline, and I will in gameplay show why I quite often do choose to have a secondary LMG, as there is great utility there. Now, flatline, of course, is very much an increase to both our burst and sustain, where fast stands with the other one was very much a sustain talent. And yeah, that does increase the damage potential of this build by quite a lot more than fast stands really does. But we're losing again a little bit because we cannot use a FAMAS with flatline effectively, as FAMAS does not have the long on the barrel rail. So it is a swing up, a swing down, a swing to the left with damage to armor, as well as, yeah, this of course does not apply to all enemies. So we, depending on the content, this will be either more effective or less effective than having a Fenris or another piece of Gruppo. But in general, this can be considered a higher damage potential variant with flatline especially. And in this case as well, I'm going to take a grade 20 weapon. As for the FAMAS, I actually do also have a grade 22 actually FAMAS that I could have used with the last one, but both of these builds are very much optimized and such, and for that one I didn't want to use a high grade weapon, just to temper it a little bit, to temper it down to what will likely be more the experience of most people, as not many people have access to higher grade weapons still, as it is quite the grind, of course, and the build itself is completely optimized, and I'm on a character that is over 1k as well, having all those stats. So that one was more to show it not at its full potential, but here we're very much going for the full potential, just to showcase that a little bit. So yeah, let's take this into some content. We have joined another agent, and we're going to do Jefferson Trade Center. We were waiting at the start for a few seconds, and they went in, so I'm joining them. Now, Jefferson Trade Center Invaded is actually not a hard mission. It has only one hard part, and actually that is maybe something that I do want to showcase maybe in here. And that is just that room with the jammers that can give some teams quite a lot of issues. And it might be good as there is one trick that can make that room a lot easier. And once you know it, that can help quite a lot. So I will actually stay with the team and try to show that. And hopefully we will fill up quite quickly. I will pulse. We have the spawn on the right. I misremembered where the where the wall and the window was, and here, especially this room, you don't want to just push in too far. There's side spawns that will happen here, and as long as you don't go too far, too crazy, then it'll be fine. I actually have not inspected my ally yet. I don't know what they were, so I will actually inspect them in a second, but just from the skills, I'm going to guess that they are some form of a red build. Also, their output-wise, they seem to be a red build with some blue cores, just looking at their armor values. We have two directives active as well, of course. Well, we have Fog of War, and we have the Special Ammo Directive. And especially the Special Ammo Directive can be quite dangerous to me with other factions. With the Black Tusk, it can also be quite dangerous, as it will eliminate, if I am disrupted while I go down, my hive will not drop. So when you're shocked or when you're disrupted, your hive will not drop on the ground, as it's inactive. And when you're shocked, you can't, basically, is the...
Warning. Unauthorized network access detected.
I will actually, take this moment to inspect them real quick.
As fast as you can.
Okay. That is a red style build, but it'll be good enough to go through this mission. Here again, they will actually spawn upstairs and rappel down, and one of the dangers here is, especially if you push in too far, as a lot of people think that, oh, nothing's here, I'll just push in deep, then they will get surrounded and quite destroyed. Now here we are at two-man scaling, and two-man scaling is actually likely the easiest scaling. I do not know why my ally is pushing in as hard as he is, but I'll just follow him, because he is not armored to the degree that could do that. He only has basically the memento providing with armor, and he had an armor core, I think. But yeah, so I'm just moving in. I'll be the damage dealer. I'll stick to mid ranges, and for the next room as well, I will actually show what I do with why I use an LMG, especially quite often. And here especially, I don't want to go down, especially with while being disrupted. So I'll heal back up, and there isn't many enemies alive yet. And I was kind of hoping that my ally would help a little bit more with that fight, but it's fine, we made it through. Yeah, so what I use the LMG for is that I'll unload it once per room. Basically, I'll just unload it, and then I won't reload it in that fight. I won't use it to go towards its sustain. Basically, I'll just unload it and then swap off. And what that means is that you're basically using the burst potential or the burst length of the LMG, and then you just have that weapon swap, bringing your total down a little bit, and then you're moving on to the burst of the AR from that point on, and then dropping down to its. Of course, then afterwards, once you start reloading the AR, then you start moving towards the sustain of the AR. But having just unloading that LMG once per room, using it as a high output, then I think I've done this mission today already. Yes, I did. And yeah, using it in that way can be quite effective. That's one of the good uses for LMGs. Now, of course, that takes away a weapon for long range or having a Scorpio. But with both, I'm fine with both. Now we've gotten some allies. Both of them are quite low level. The scaling has gone up as well, of course, now. So hopefully they're adding in by themselves enough to be worthy of their additions. I will actually kill that mini tank if I have to. Here I'll use, yeah, so on the boss, I'm using the LMG as its burst output, basically. Just gonna unload on him. Now, there my AR would have actually been enough as well. I just noticed how how one of my allies has barely any armor, which means that he's likely running level 30 gear, which you should not do. He's yeah. That is quite interesting. I hadn't seen that in a while. I had to take a double take of a player having been loaded in and still having that kind of armor. I am curious as to why, what even, basically. But that makes him a full carry. He will not be adding anything to this group, which, yeah, you should avoid doing. If you can, don't hinder your team more than you're helping. Hopefully that grenade, yeah, doesn't go for me, and it did. I could not have healed in that time anyway, so I was hoping to get the weak point on this, and that is the downside quite often with glass. You'll be put into situations like that where there is basically at the point that I was there and fighting him and such, there wasn't a no-win situation. For me to have won, I wouldn't have had to be there, basically. So I could not have healed. I could not... if I had gotten lucky and gotten the weak point destroyed, that would have saved me. But I didn't. I did hit it a few times anyway, but wasn't enough to take it out. So likely also that would not have been really a viable thing to have happened. Going to push in a little bit, trying to basically flank these enemies, although my allies are so far behind that that's also not working well. I'm going to move over here so I have a high wall available, as especially I know, yeah, there's one more wave coming, and that wave can quite often be quite rushy and really push out hard.
Immediate medical assistance needed.
Going to push in some more. Take the other corner. I will actually kill this mini tank as, yeah, I don't want to peek past it. I'll break the weak point on that minigun dog, and then it's dead. This is the last wave, right? That's always quite often the question, but yeah, with one thing alive only, that would be the last wave, yeah. I am curious what the story is there with that one player with level 30 gear. That is something I have not seen in a while. You quite often do see it when boosting people, of course, when they do not take any gear or anything. Then yeah, they look like that as well. Although even there, it's very much discouraged of never gearing up. Just having a bit more armor is quite easy thing to have. And again, I'm using my LMG just to basically using it in its for its mag that first mag that it provides me. Once it is empty, it is going on my back and not coming back out till... but yeah, it basically increases my output potential because I'm not having to reload for those rounds. And LMGs, while they burst less, once you compare them to an AR with 1 or 2 reloads, usually we of course have one and a half reload basically because I do not have the gunner pouch there, then yeah, them being in burst and the AR moving towards having its a sustain of 2 mags, the LMG actually wins. And that is one of the things that you can do with LMGs that can be quite effective. Now we're moving quite slowly here. It's not great. We're not moving at great speed, but that's fine. We're carrying a little bit. That ally, at least, even though they are not as useful, they are still trying to heal us and such. And they're running it somewhat as a healing setup, which, yeah, kind of works. Here is the room with the jammers, and I'll actually show... You can shoot... a lot of people will push in way too deep in this room, but you can actually shoot all of the jammers from here. So you saw me pulse there. And that's especially this one. You can shoot it from here, although it is kind of hard to shoot as, yeah, a lot of the rounds go around it. I will go after this dog. And then, yeah, there's one in the middle and there's one on the far terrace. But knowing especially that hole to shoot that one on the left there can be quite useful, as especially this room is dangerous when you try to push into it. That was a weird lag spike, as, yeah, my health... I'm going to just chain that enemy. I'm going to try and kill that. And yeah, you see the last one is all the way back there. And then the one in the middle was already destroyed. And that makes this fight a lot easier. And not having to push into the jammers to deal with them, pushing out in the open, means that we can just now, instead of what quite often happens is a few people will push into there, but without hives, without support, as, yeah, if there is, for instance, an eclipse or a healer or something in your group, they will be disrupted at those points, of course. And without those... yeah, people will be overconfident a little bit and they will somewhat get destroyed. Now I'll pulse here. I won't push in. I'll use my LMG here. Just outputting as much as I can. And yeah, here's always the annoying part, is that there are several enemies on high... on the high ground. They have basically the same high ground as us, and that makes it really hard for us to push into them. So what I'll do here is actually push onto this left side, go at the same height as them. Now, one of the annoying things is that this mini tank is between us, but I'll just have to kill it. I was hoping to not hurt my ally there, but I still did somewhat. And the boss fight here is actually quite easy. That wasn't the type of drone I thought it was. And
Serious trauma detected.
That's the last enemy, although hopefully I do not go down. No, they go into animation that I know that is safe to shoot them with. There's one enemy back there, and oh, we still have one more wave. I thought we were done, but I miscounted in how many waves we had. Now,
Vital signs.
luckily, I did not go down well disrupted, as
System malfunctioning.
yeah, that can be going down and having to be rezzed means that well, one person is down, of course, because they're down, and now then you also lose a second person because they're out there reviving them. And that can be quite a dangerous moment. I'm trying to understand what was... Oh, that is... I did not know you could shoot through the glass there, actually. That's an interesting thing. Had never occurred before. And here again, I'm going... So these heavies have a hole on their back, although I'll just go through the chest. There's no reason to go for that hole. And there we went through that. And this boss fight is quite easy. I will actually reload my LMG here. So one of the things as well, actually, I should have shown it there. When you pick up ammo, that also counts as a reload. So you can actually just grab ammo as to reload, which I should have done there. But also it didn't matter because there was plenty of time to reload. And yeah, that using LMGs for that is actually one of the good uses for LMGs. The other one is to use them as crit chance variants, especially for as a halfway point basically between ARs and LMGs. They work quite well for that. In a second as well, likely if not everybody else is going to go after the boss, if I'm basically one-on-oneing with the boss, then I'll also grab out my LMG. And there it's because I will likely not be able to kill them in one magazine of my AR with 4-man scaling. But what I likely will be able to do is kill them with my LMG without having to reach the end of this magazine. These choppers are actually as well on a fixed pattern with two on that side, and then we swap over to this side. I know that there is plenty of time to reload in between this fight, so here actually again I'll use my LMG for a little bit, as I know that waiting for the next choppers to come in. So the only thing that is a little bit randomized here is where the boss comes down. Now in this case he's coming down here. I was kind of hoping that my allies actually went for the rest, but they didn't. So we'll have a few guys on that side that we'll have to deal with in a second. But yeah, there I just used my LMG for that. I'm going to try and chain that heavy, although I don't really have a shot towards it, so I'll leave that for now. I'll put him behind some cover. And here, if you are in a coordinated team, what you really want to do is basically have two people go after the boss, kill it quickly enough, and the rest stays back here and deals with this wave. I'll use my LMG here as well again, because still has a few rounds remaining. And yeah, the weapon swap is a lot shorter than reloading either of the weapons.
But I think we're okay.
And yeah, I had done this already this week, turns out, because I did not get a named weapon as I would for the first clear of the week. I'll actually check the loot over there and maybe drop some for my allies if they stick around for a second to receive them. As yeah, that's often quite an issue as people insta-leave. But there you saw a little bit what this build can do, and the damage potential of this build is quite a lot higher, and that does work quite well. That can make quite the difference. As likely if I'll look at the damage numbers, I will be a little bit higher than I actually would have expected. I was getting a little bit supported by that hardware, even though they were running level 30 gear, which is quite amusing. But yeah, you saw a little bit what this can do, and it is still quite an effective build. Even if Strikers does exist, these are still very effective. Nothing has changed about that. They've just been outclassed a little bit by that. But I'll discuss that a little bit more in our conclusion in a second. And to conclude this video, I hope I showed you somewhat how I play the glass reds and how to put one together, especially for perfect glass high-end red as we have it here for this whole showcase, and what its damage potential can be and why it still very much works, even though I've at times, of course, compared it to some of the newer builds that somewhat overshadow it in Striker especially. There is still value to these, especially if you don't want to deal with mechanics, as that can also sometimes be very much the thing, especially as I alluded to several times, is these builds are great for raid, especially for starting out, although not with glass. So for instance, with this character, I would swap to the spotter chest. With other characters, I would swap to an obliterate chest or even an unbreakable chest, and all of those would work a little bit better, especially for raids. But for heroic content and even legendary, glass rods still work. They used to work and they still do. And while other builds have overshadowed them a little bit, they still have their place. They still have their niches a little bit. As their damage potential, especially with glass from the first shot, is unmatched by most other things. Where focus even, of course, also still has to stack, and you have to deal with the mechanics there. This build is very mechanic light, and that can be quite the advantage for some people. And still, I would say, and that's also why in my recommended list they are still at the top, these are very much still the cornerstone of any starting out with filling up your layouts. I would say having a high-end red, having a striker, having a turret drone build, all of those are very much cornerstones to have. And especially learning to become proficient with glass, to know tactics that work well, how to shoot, how to corner peek, how to pie rooms, how to not die as much. Glass can teach you all of those things quite well. And if you can do it well with a glass cannon build, then those skills carry over to all of the other high-end reds. And Perfect Glass Cannon is still a good teacher. It is very much, if you want to go in depth into your division journey, at some point learning how to play glass well can be quite the benefit. It will teach you things that will carry over into all of your other gameplay. And that's why I still have very much, I will at points recommend this to people to run and to get proficient with. It is a thing that will teach you how to play well with a whip behind your back instead of a carrot in front of you. So yeah, definitely worth adding to your collection if you are interested in playing in weapon builds, in red builds. And yeah, for that ends this video, and for my next video I will likely follow this up with an in-depth guide into in-game time, and that is quite a simple subject, as it is once I've shown you a few charts, even though it has quite the quirks, it will become clear by showing you a few of the charts and such. And mostly that will include some story time. And that will follow up this video a lot in a shorter time span than in between this video and the previous one, as I've had some technical difficulties that had to be fixed before I could end this video. And that's why this one took a little while. But likely I will move back to having 2 videos per week, which is kind of the target that I'm aiming for. So yeah, I hope you join me for those ones. Have a good night.